Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Stablecoins Are Killing It. This is episode number 12, and we've got a great show for you today, featuring Ezechiel Copic from cLabs, who works on the Celo project. Hi, Ezechiel.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to have you here. And then we have Sid Jain Arpit Agarwarl from DeFi Dollar. Hey, Arpit.
Hey, guys.
Good.
Hey guys, great to be here.
So the format of the show is real simple. Each of our panelists will speak off of slides for around 15 minutes, talking about their project, sharing some views, macro views of the stablecoin ecosystem, and then we'll spend the last half of the show taking questions from the audience. So if you've got questions anytime during the show, feel free to put them into the chat on Zoom, and if we take your question, we'll chat back, we'll tell you where you are in line, and then when it's your turn, we'll open up your audio and video. You get to join the panel and have an interactive discussion with our esteemed panelists. And so with that, we're going to start the show with Ezechiel. So Ezechiel, I'm making you host.
Okay.
You can grab the screen.
All right. Thanks again for having me. So let me just pull up. Let's see. There we are. And let me just share that. One second. Okay. So hopefully, can you see everything? Hopefully that works out. Excellent. So again, thanks to Lou for having me on. Just a little bit of a background. So I joined cLabs, which is a company working on the Celo platform about a year ago. And prior to that, I had a background in central banking. So I used to work for the Central Bank of New York for many years. And then after that, I joined the World Gold Council, where I worked with central banks around the world, focusing on gold reserves management. So I kind of come from maybe a more traditional financial background, kind of more focused on sort of traditional central banking and things like that. But one of the things that really interested me in stable coins and in this industry was just the power that they had now, and this idea of programmable money and what you can do with it. So I'm going to share a little bit about Celo, and then a little bit about kind of the things I'm working on around the power of this digital money. So hopefully you guys find it interesting. So the first thing to, I guess, think about is Celo is basically an open platform that makes financial tools accessible to anybody with a mobile phone. Also, I should apologize if you can hear some background noise. They're doing work on the apartment next door to me, and this is unfortunately what we deal with during the time of COVID. So I hope it's not too loud. Anyway, so what we wanted to do at Celo was really take this full stack approach when giving people these financial tools. So not only did we create the blockchain, which is open source and decentralized, but that we also created a developer kit to allow developers to build on it. And then we even went a step further and we created our own wallet, which is called Valora, and will be out shortly. And the idea for that was we wanted to make sure that we really understood the user's experience. We did a lot of work testing it and piloting it in countries all over the world to make sure that we were understanding kind of what their challenges were, what were things that they were having an issue with into traditional cryptocurrency space. And so that led us to, basically three main innovations. The first one was that, we decided that it needed to be mobile first. And because of that, we also had to create a light client that was extremely efficient and extremely fast at syncing, with our validators and with our nodes on a mobile device, because obviously those are resource constrained. It's not like you have some computer and things like that. And without getting into too much of the details, we were able to shrink the data required, the data transfer required through our system by a factor. So we're about 100,000 times lighter than Bitcoin by comparison, and we're about 11 million times lighter than Ethereum. So we were able to shrink that down considerably. The other innovation, of course, is the stablecoins themselves, which is a whole new industry, which is obviously what this podcast is about, and just having that ability to create coins that are pegged to various fiat currencies. So right now we have the Celo dollar, which is pegged to the US dollar, but the platform can handle anything. It can handle Celo euros, yen, whatever you want. And I think the third and final kind of just main innovation that we've worked on is this fact that, public keys can be really hard to remember, and they're really long, and it's not very, it's very cumbersome. And so we basically mapped phone numbers and hashes of those phone numbers to public keys to make it easier, so that you can just go into your contact list in your phone and you can send anybody Celo anywhere around the world, even if they don't actually have the app yet. So it allows them to download it. And the other thing that we've worked on too is we really wanted to make sure that we aren't the only ones working and building on this. We wanted to create this partnership around the world, this alliance. And so at the moment, we've created this thing called the Alliance for Prosperity. And right now we have I think we have at least 100. We keep getting new ones every day, so we might actually be over 100 by now, organizations that have joined our alliance to help us work on many of these use cases, whether that's a savings use case or a lending use case or giving, all these different applications to help us really just enrich the environment and to make sure that the people who are using it, have a say in how it's being developed, and so that was pretty important to us. And so that was kind of the ecosystem that we've created. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is, given my central banking background, is this idea of how can we use it for monetary policy, and how can we use it to sort of better our society. And so I wrote this paper recently on influencing the velocity of a central bank digital currency, which is essentially basically a stable coin created by a central bank, or at least perhaps backed by a central bank in some way. And I can get into that if you want, but essentially that's just the main idea.
And obviously there's different projects that are going on in the CBDC world.
Yes.
Did you get did you get inspiration from any CBDC in particular?
No, no, because no one's actually talked about it. I think, just spending time looking at, right now, people are just trying to figure out how they would actually create a CBDC. But I've kind of decided to kind of take that for granted in some sense and figure out, well, okay, but if we had CBDC, what are the great things that we could do with it? Because as you know, while there are some projects that are in pilot, China, the People's Bank of China, their central bank has a pilot project they're working on. The Riksbank, which is the central bank in Sweden, is working on some stuff. Nothing is live yet. And right now it's more about just proving this hypothesis that, yes, I can send you money through your digital wallet. And it's just kind of the very rudimentary stages. But I'm trying to think beyond that and think about what the real power of this is. And one of them is this idea of changing the way we deal with policy. So everyone's familiar with right now interest rates, right? And so central banks, they move interest rates up and down. And that changes the price of money. And that's sort of basically how we traditionally focus on it, right? So we think about making money more or less expensive to incentivize people. But my idea was, well, instead of, as well as, my idea is not to change monetary policy entirely, but to add yet another channel. So now with this technology, we can also focus on the speed of money. So we can incentivize people to spend money faster or slower. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as to why that's important. And so basically the really exciting part of this is that the technology behind stablecoins, so whether it's a regular stablecoin issued by a private entity or a stablecoin that becomes a central bank digital currency, we can now have this new transmission mechanism, which is really powerful. And I got thinking about it because there's a quote by the head of the Bank for International Settlements who talked about the fact that token-based money now makes it practical what we usually thought was always theoretical. And so just to get a little bit theoretical for the audience, and hopefully it's not too deep in the woods on econ. But when we think about velocity of money, which is essentially how many times does a banknote go around the system, right? Like we have no insight as to how often that happens. And the way we do it now is pretty impractical. We basically just take a country's nominal GDP and divide it by its money supply. Divide it by how many banknotes there are. And we say, okay, well, your velocity is 10x. But it's very sort of backward looking. It's not very precise. It's pretty inefficient. But if you have with this, with stable coins and this ability to do real-time transactions, you can now actually understand how money is flowing throughout the system. And I do want to stop here and recognize that, like, clearly there are privacy concerns. And my point of this is not to say that if I send Lou money, that the central bank is going to be taking note of that. The idea of this is that central banks don't really care on an individual level. Like, they want to know, like, what's happening from a system level, right? So they want to be able to understand that if they raise interest rates, for example, what kind of impact is that having on society? And by seeing, and having real-time transactional data, they can have a better understanding of it so that they can create policies that are more effective and that help and that have more of a better impact for overall society. And so going back to the formula on the left, another way of thinking about this is that we often rewrite this formula to say that velocity times money supply equals nominal GDP. And because we don't understand velocity, we're usually taught to keep that constant. And so then we basically say, okay, well, if I raise or lower money supply, then I can raise or lower nominal GDP, in theory. But, what's happening is, when you look at sort of this impact of the Great Financial Recession, right? So if you look at the chart on the left, between the 10 years between 2008 and 2017, the U.S. money supply increased by more than $2 trillion. And that was based on stimulus measures that the Treasury did, sending people checks, as well as quantitative easing measures by the Federal Reserve. And so the idea was that, okay, well, if you flood the market with all of this money supply, and if you hold velocity constant, then GDP will rise. And the theory suggested that GDP should rise by that solid green line of basically more than, about $28 trillion. But what actually happened is the chart on the right. And we saw is that GDP did rise a little bit, but it only increased by about $5 trillion. And the reason for that is because velocity dropped significantly. And so that's why velocity is so important, because if people then stop moving that money throughout the system, then that has a real impact on the economy. And so the point of this is that, there are different roles for money, right? So money can either be a unit of account, it can be a store of value, or it can be a medium of exchange. But the store of value and the medium of exchange can sometimes be conflicting, because if you're worried about like a recession and so you hoard your money and you just kind of store it up because of its value, then basically that means you're not using it as a medium of exchange, right? You're not going to stores, you're not buying things. And if you don't buy things at your local store, then that shop owner can't use that money to pay his or her employees. And then they essentially go out of business. And so you can kind of create this negative feedback loop. And so there was actually a solution to this idea of hoarding that was created more than 100 years ago, back in 1916, by an economist by the name of Gesell. And so he had this really interesting idea where he said, okay, well, let's basically put a stamp on money that says, during the month of January, you have to have a stamp on it. And if you want to use this money in February, you've got to get a new stamp. And so the idea was that it incentivized people to use that money quicker, because they didn't want to have to go out and buy the stamp and pay for the extra money of the stamp. So they thought, well, I'm just going to use the money because I just don't want to pay for that extra cost. And it turned out that it worked really well. And that they did an experiment in a small town in Austria. And it really actually helped with increased employment growth. And, so there was there was a lot of excitement about it. But as you can imagine, like in today's environment, we don't really have it. It's not very practical to put stamps on all of our money. And so that's not something that we're, going to do. But one of the interesting things is, we can now do that with the digital currencies. So instead of it requiring a stamp, we can have a fee structure. So there's something called a demurrage fee, which is sort of very similar, where the idea is that a government, let's say that they give you stimulus money, right? So especially governments around the world with COVID, they're all finding ways to give their citizens stimulus money to help support their local economy. So, let's say that the US government actually had a stable coin that they could give to people as in the form of a stimulus money, right? In the form of these $1,200 checks. But they said, okay, listen, we want you to use this money at your local retailers. We don't want you to hoard it. We want you to spend it. And so if you don't spend it within a week, we're going to take back 1% of that money. And if you don't, and that will keep going week after week, or maybe it's if you don't spend it within a month. Like the time frame itself is irrelevant. You can pick whatever you want. And the idea is that then you incentivize people to spend that money quickly on these goods and services, which then keeps the economy going. And if they don't spend the money and those demurrage fees go back to the government, one of the interesting things is then you can take those fees that have accumulated and use them on social welfare programs like unemployment benefits. So you can keep it kind of within the system. And so that's one way of doing it. But obviously there's people certainly have an aversion to having these fees. So another way that you can influence velocity is by using a cashback method. And now some people will say, yeah, but credit cards already have cash back, right? If I use my credit card, I'll get cash back at these places, which is great. But the thing is that we're also thinking about a world where there's so many people who are unbanked. There's, I think, 1.7 billion people are either unbanked or underbanked, which means they don't have access to traditional finance. And so they don't have access to credit cards that give them cash back when they spend. And so this notion is that, what if the government instead said, okay, well, we're going to give you this stimulus money and we want you to spend it. And if you spend it on these restaurants, if you spend it on travel or whatever, we're going to give you an added bonus to try and help you think about, to kind of channel the money, right? So you think about, and oftentimes the US government will bail out different industries directly. But this is a way where they would basically be able to, specify money kind of going to industries without having to bail them out, because people will naturally be incentivized to go to certain places if they know they're going to perhaps get a cash back reward. And then another way of doing it, you can simply do a hybrid of it. There's sort of all different flavors of this where maybe you have fees for a little bit, maybe you have cash back. But the point of this is that the technology now, these smart contracts, this programmable money, allows central banks to do so much more with it for public good, right? To help really support the economy. Because you think about these stimulus checks, most people don't use the money. So a survey was done after the 2008 stimulus. Only 20% of the money was spent on new spending. The rest of it was saved or it was used to pay down debt. And I certainly understand the idea of saving. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be saving, but this, during times of crisis, if every single person saves and nobody spends, then that's going to, really have an impact on the economy, and it will basically grind it to a halt. So we need to find ways to helping incentivize it. And that's one of the exciting things that we can now do with the stablecoin technology. So that's it. I'd love to hear your questions. And if you ever want to reach out, I'll just put my contact info there as well. Otherwise, I will stop sharing and I will hand it over to Sid and Arpit.
Thank you, Ezechiel.
Yeah, I think that was pretty informative.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. That was terrific. And now, so Arpit, I'll make you the host.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure.
Okay, so you're the host now. And Ezechiel, thanks for sticking around for the Q&A session of the call.
Cool, guys. I think I'll just give some context around how we think about how the space has evolved, right? I think before jumping into what DeFi Dollar does, Arpit will take you guys through the technicalities of it and how we're designing a system to be future proof, right? But just to give some context, I think we've been in this space since 2017, right? I think I entered the space in 2017, and back then, the only denominations, right, you could get on exchanges to buy any sort of cryptocurrencies were mostly in BTC and probably sometime later in ETH, right? So that is from where we started. But right now, if you see any of the major exchanges, right, I think a lot of the trading volume has actually come over to, let's say, USDT or some of the other stable coins such as USDC, right? Uh, and in the DeFi native ecosystem, I think it's centered around DAI, right? So the whole point is, I think as a digital currency evolution, right, as we've seen, I think we had Bitcoin as a store of value, but all throughout of 2017 and 2018, right, I think we just had USDT, which was coming up, and now it's like hitting billions in volume, right? So the whole point was that we had a store of value, but we did not have essentially what was a good medium of exchange, right? That came in. So I give due credit to Bitfinex and the other guys, right? So without USDT, I think a lot of people did not realize what is the kind of value that could be unlocked by having a digital native stablecoin, right? And I think there's a whole transition that even they went through from Omni to ERC20, right? And that just goes on to show that, okay, that there was a pressing need and they could actually fill that gap. The whole point is we've come a long way since then, right? We've got this whole category that even Ezechiel kind of highlighted, right? We've got algorithmic stablecoins, we've got crypto-backed stablecoins, we've got institutional backed stablecoins, right? So, and this is just the start, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg that is visible, right? There are a ton of other approaches because everyone, you can't really say that DAI is going to be the best, or there might be some other protocol that comes up with a better sort of a crypto-backed stablecoin algorithm, right, than MakerDAO, right? So the whole point there is that we wanted to figure out at DeFi Dollar, okay, is there a way, in what way can we affect that, right? Because this is a constantly evolving industry. 2017, you just had a couple of them. 2020, it's difficult to keep track, right? How many stablecoins are there at the moment, right? So we definitely see a lot of innovation that is happening at the moment. Even right now, right? There are some projects that we're excited about, even apart from DeFi Dollar, right? Probably not going to touch upon them right away, but yeah, I think with due time, yes. So this is one thing that we hope to change, right? I think with respect to adoption, early on in 2017-18, I think not a lot of people were even willing to accept, let's say, BTC or ETH, right, due to the volatility. But somehow, in case you have to have adoption with digital currencies, right, I think stable coins are going to play like a major role, right? And that is why even we chose to focus on this kind of a niche topic that used to be like, let's say, a couple of years back, but currently I think stable coins have captured everyone's imagination, so to say, right? We're like on a podcast that definitely just talks about that. So that goes a long way in showing, right, that how far we've come, right? I think that's it from my side. For the moment, I'll let Arpit take you guys through some of the things and design parameters that we have for DeFi Dollar, and then probably we can have like a more broader conversation around where do we see it going in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and like while we are at it, right, I had an interesting experience just yesterday. So a friend of mine who is an accountant in our country, right, he hasn't really traded crypto or anything like that. He just knows that I do it and I'm his friend. So then he finally took this step yesterday and he said that he wants to like start trading crypto, put a little amount of money in it. And like, so I spent an hour getting him signed up on Binance and stuff, right? And then obviously I gave him Tether because like for his mental model, starting to trade with US dollar made sense, right? Because if I would have given him ETH or BTC, he doesn't really know what that is, but he could relate with what a stable coin is, right? And interestingly, his first question was, does the value of Tether coin always, is it equal to the price that I see on Google, right? The USD to INR price. INR is our currency. So then, like he expected it to be that. But then obviously it's about demand and supply. So I told him about that. So I think, yeah, for a person who is totally new to crypto, I think the stablecoin is a great on-ramp, right? Otherwise it becomes much difficult for them. Yeah, and like that said, we are super interested in stablecoins, and DeFi Dollar is one of those experiments. So yeah, just give me a moment. Right. So why do we need an index stablecoin? So our idea here is, there are so many stablecoins there in the market. There's USDC, there's Tether, there's DAI, there's SUSD, and all of them have their pros and cons, right? So we thought, why not try to make something out of them? Why not put them in an index? So why do we need an index? What if the index that we create that gives you protection against volatility? Somehow we could have that seesaw which keeps the peg at $1, right? Even when the underlying stablecoins are moving. That was one of the ideas. And then reduced custodian and censorship risk. What if you could, build an index by putting various stablecoins in, like a stablecoin backed by those stablecoins, and then essentially that reduces your custodian risk because at least some amount of that is in decentralized stablecoins like DAI or SUSD, right? And then if you can, how would you mitigate the systemic risk to DeFi from a particular stablecoin failing, right? So if Tether goes to zero, what really happens? So what if you could build an asset that at least attempts to be resilient to these things, right? And that was our idea. So yeah, as I spoke, like volatility, decentralized stablecoins are good, but they're not stable simply because there is no proper way to arbitrage them, right? If DAI is trading at 1 to 2% higher, you can't really arbitrage it immediately. There's a very difficult, governance process to keep it going. Also, the demand and supply doesn't always scale, and that's why there is it's hardly on its peg, right? And similarly with SUSD, that's a new decentralized stablecoin on the market, and yeah, interesting things happening there as well. With centralized stablecoins, as we all know, there is actually this point is about volatility again, right? Because centralized or not, coins are hardly on their peg. With centralized stablecoins, there's a custodian risk, which Ezechiel spoke about. So the bank could run away with your funds. The team behind stablecoin itself could be having fractional reserves, and so much could be like the possibilities are endless there. And of course, like DAI is great, but it needs a lot of extensive governance to be actually keep it on its peg, right? The maker holders have to pull so many levers, move around things to be actually, keep that system going. So then we are building DeFi Dollar, which is an index of all of these things, right? Currently, it's backed by USD, USDT, USDC, DAI, and SUSD. So we are just putting all of them in together in a basket, right? And trying to see what really happens when you do that. So then these were simulations from the data from 1st of January till 1st of July, right? And this is, so we got prices from an API like CoinGecko, and then we ran the DUSD price, which is a DeFi dollar, through our algorithm. And then we actually got promising results, which means that we did see that DeFi dollar is mostly closer to the $1 mark as compared to the underlying coins, right? So then we thought that, okay, we are on the right path. Specifically, what we do is, like, before I actually move on to this slide, specifically what we are doing right now is how do you mint DeFi dollars? You get some stable coins to be able to do it. We put all of that in the Curve Finance protocol, which is an AMM for stablecoins. A really cool thing happening in the DeFi space, right? We put all of that in Curve, and then the protocol is collateralized by Curve receipts, right? The Curve LP tokens. So that's what we do. In addition to just being an index of stablecoins, we also have a defense layer to maintain the peg. And how that works is we also have a native staking mechanism in the protocol itself. And a person who minted DUSD but doesn't want to use it per se, just want, let's say that person is just chasing high yields, right? That person can actually stake DUSD in our protocol itself. And that the staked USD act as cushion for volatility. So what I'm trying to say here is, let's say there are 100 USD in circulation and one of them is staked. And let's say for some reason the stable coins are falling below their peg and they reach $99, right? The backing, the pool that backs the DeFi dollar. So there are 100 DeFi dollars, but now there are $99 worth of stable coins in the collateral, simply because they were moving from their peg. At that point, what happens is we consider the staked funds to be covering the deficit for the DeFi dollars that are in circulation, right? So you take that risk, but you also get a higher return. And how that works is, so if let's say there are only 10% of DeFi dollars staked, they get income from all the DeFi dollars, even if they are in circulation, right? So if 10 are staked and 90 are not staked, the 10 coins are getting income from 100 DeFi dollars that are in circulation. So if you want an asset that is an index of stable coins, you want to cap your risk, you mint DeFi dollars, you put them in DeFi protocols, you use them. And if you want to bear risk, but also get a higher reward, you can stake them in the protocol. And that helps in peg stabilization. So that is our idea there. And yeah, we are a team of 4 right now building this, right? And to go a little bit into more details, because we are trying to build a stable coin that is more stable, right? So obviously we need oracles for that to be able to tell us, you know, what are the prices of the underlying stable coins outside the blockchain, so that, you know, we can pull some levers, not manually, the protocol is programmed to do that. So when that happens, it tries to get DeFi dollar at $1 mark again. And of course, we are building on Curve Finance. In terms of progress, we are quite early. We deployed a V0 on Coven, which was about a month back. And that back then we were just a hackathon project. And after that, we released a V1 spec about
can you just, for the folks who don't know, quickly explain what Coven is?
Right. So Coven is a Ethereum testnet. So there are different testnets. They mimic the Ethereum blockchain. So there is the Coven testnet, there is a Ropsten testnet, there's a Goldie testnet, and all of these testnets have a little bit differences in their parameters. You know, but for like practical purposes, you can use any. So yeah, Coven is a testnet you use to simulate applications on Ethereum.
So you're not spending real Ether for doing deployment. That is the basic.
Right. Right. And it works exactly like the mainnet. So you know whether your application is working. Yeah, so that was that. And then we had launched a V1 spec, and this is also a design that we are currently building. And the community really liked it. So that encouraged us to actually pursue this project. So we have been working on it for a month and looking to launch really soon. And yeah, like if you would like to join the conversation, get in touch with us. There's Discord, there's Twitter, and you can email us. So yeah, that is that generally. But I mean, I would say DeFi Dollar is a very niche product in DeFi, right? And I think that that is something that we are really interested in, because both Sid and I are really big DeFi fanatics, right? We make lots of transactions every day, even if we lose money on gas. So we thought, you know, why not try to make DeFi more resilient to a particular stablecoin failing, right? Because so many of the DeFi protocols hinge on the success of Tether, right? Simply because it's so liquid and it's prevalent in all the protocols. But if that moves from its peg, or if it goes to zero, we don't want DeFi to fail. So our attempt here is to like actually build a coin that can probably reduce the systemic risk. And yeah, like we are pushing through, and let's see how that goes.
So a couple questions before we go to the questions from the audience. The first is, so you've got it up on testnet, and so you're not taking into account gas fees, which are now considerable. Do you have some concerns that when you do go live, that the balancing mechanism, given the gas fees, won't be workable?
Oh, actually, we had been optimizing for the gas fees throughout, right? And we had a lot of back and forth with our auditors, right? So I had taken some trade-offs which would reduce the gas fees, like pulling prices from the oracles and doing all of that. But so I had made like careful trade-offs about how I want to do these things. But our auditors wanted, like we would like you to pull the prices from the oracles on every transaction because you should do that, you should do that, because that enhances the safety of the system. But at the same time, that really increases the gas cost, because if I'm trying to pull prices from the oracles on every transaction, then that doesn't make sense, right? So then we took a decision that we will not do that. So there's a particular function called sync system, and that pulls the prices from the oracles and like puts everything in order. And the team is ready to sponsor that cost so that user don't have to do that. Right? So throughout when we were building this, we have taken trade-offs based on this decision alone that, where can we reduce gas? Even if it's just 10,000 or 20,000, how can we do that? And our auditors are not very happy with that. But yeah, like that has been on our mind.
So to just add a little bit of context there, right? I think what you're saying is correct. It's spot on, right? We've tried to optimize it on our end to whatever maximum we could, right? But when you look at it, right, when you have to pay like $10 a transaction or $15 a transaction, right? I think it becomes tough for the usual people, right, or the retail folks at the moment to come in and test out these products, right? So currently for us, I think the objective right now is to check for the product market fit and check for the resiliency, right? Which we can do using, let's say, whale capital as well, right? So at the moment, because this is not a short-term project, right? I think the implications of having like a stable coin backed index, right, will be huge, because the total addressable market, right, that we can see in stable coins, it's just keep going up, right? It just keeps going up. So what's going to happen next is you're going to see the next wave of stable coins come in, right? We've not seen any algorithmic ones come to the market and perform really well, right? And also you have all of these talks of sovereign coins coming in, and let's say CBDCs that you mentioned, right? So all of them are essentially going to perform the same function at the end of the day, right? So the key here is you can't remove all of these systemic risks, but you can hedge them, right? And while you're hedging them, you can also provide value to the users who are holding this asset to participate in things like, let's say, DeFi, or probably just to give that peace of mind to the retailer, right? Or probably to the business that is holding those coins, that okay, that there is not going to be, let's say, even if one of those coins fails from its peg, right? You're not going to lose 100% of your money. You're probably going to have like 10% losses, right? Which is also not acceptable, but that's the best we can do at the moment. And our approach for the V2 is to actually ensure that we can cap those losses to the maximum extent possible, right? We're not going to become a central bank that keeps on printing currency, but yeah, I think there are some mechanisms that we can still do to actually cap the losses there, right?
Okay, terrific. Thanks. It's a great answer. And the last question before I turn it over is, I was really impressed when I met you guys about your backers. That they were some really a lot of the leaders, thought leaders in DeFi, and I thought that was incredible. You guys you're both in Bangalore, is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So how do a couple young guys in Bangalore get this kind of blue chip roster of DeFi investors?
I think I'm going to leave Arpit to answer that, but I'll just give you a little bit of context before that. So you guys have heard of InstaDapp, right?
I'm sorry? Yes.
InstaDapp. Have you guys?
Yeah. Another Indian.
Exactly. It's a coincidence that they're Indian too. But yeah, that's the power of DeFi, right? That's the power of Ethereum. That's the power of, let's say, permissionless networks, right? You don't need any sort of background. So full all respect to Ezechiel, right? I think there are people who have immense experience and who have had that kind of exposure to the traditional finance world, right? But the kind of composability that is coming in at the moment, right, with permissionless networks, I think it's very easy for a couple of folks, right? So I'm an engineer by profession. I've done my MBA as well. I don't have any specific, let's say, in-depth knowledge with how stablecoins work, right? But when it comes to Ethereum-based protocols, I think that is where we stand out, right? We know what is possible, we know what can be done, and more importantly, right, we know what users want, right? So that is a killer combination, right? Which and that potential gets unlocked by these permissionless networks, right? And yeah, I think it's a pretty amazing story. I think Arpit will share it, how we got so much of interest coming in. It starts with a hackathon, but yeah, over to you, Arpit.
Yeah, where was the hackathon?
So it was a virtual hackathon, yeah, and ETH Global team was doing it, the team which is behind all the Ethereum hackathons. So then I was working full time at another company, and then there was this hackathon. I always like to participate in hackathons, and as Siddharth said, right, that is the power of these open networks, right? They are permissionless, you know. So then I thought, okay, let's think of this silly index of stablecoins, and let's see how it goes, right? And then that went well. We won the Chainlink prize because they were really impressed by our use of oracles. And I hadn't really thought about it, right? I didn't really think that we'll make a company out of it or anything. I just thought that Ethereum is just permissionless, right? And you just spend a couple $100 and then you deploy a protocol. And if anyone wants to use it, they use it. So then that was my mentality behind that. And just like, you know, and of course, my inspiration was all these discussions on Twitter where people keep complaining that DAI is never on its peg and USDC blacklisted some guys and all of that. Then I thought, okay, why not, like, let's do this experiment and then build an index out of it. And apparently people really liked it. So yeah, like some of our investors reached out to us and like we brainstormed together, and yeah, how we formed a company out of it.
Yeah, well, congrats, guys. It's super impressive. And so with that, let's start taking some questions from the audience. And our first question is from James Howard. Hey, James.
Great. Thanks for taking my question, Lou. So my question is for Celo. Do you guys have a view on universal basic crypto? Because your protocol would be perfect to stamp tokens, and you could have for certain uses, healthcare, food, housing, and even discretionary. And then the money could only be used for that case. And also the stamp would also provide a time. So if it's not used in a certain time, it would go back to the treasury. And I think this will become a thing once, you know, we have FedCoin and other sovereign currencies.
Yeah, thanks, James. This is a really great question. Again, I'll preface my answer first by apologizing. It feels like they're doing demolition work literally in my kitchen. Yeah, the idea of universal basic income is a really interesting and powerful idea. It's certainly something that we're very excited about. It's something we've thought about a lot, especially the programmability of money, like you said. You can tie this income to specific needs, and so whether that's, you know, housing, food, you know, et cetera. You can also, I mean, we kind of do that now. When you think about in the US, we have that system for EBT, you know, which is essentially like that. I'm not sure if you realize, but EBT, if you don't use it after a year, it actually reverts back to the treasury.
That works.
Yeah, so I mean it's kind of a sort of a long time. But yeah, I mean, stable coins and this technology is it's perfect for that, right? It's perfect for kind of making sure that when people get sort of pension funds and money like that, that it can be directed to specific places, if you want. So yeah, definitely UBI is one of our big use cases. It's certainly something that we're talking to people about. I mean, given the current crisis that we're all going through, I think this idea of UBI is now getting its spotlight. And so I think that eventually you're going to see that natural conversation with, okay, well, now that we actually want to do UBI and we've got this really great technology, we should just combine the two. I don't think we're there yet from the policymakers' perspective, because they're still trying to get their head around what the technology can do. And they're still trying to get their head around whether or not, you know, they want to do UBI. But I think that once we kind of get there, then all the pieces are in place. So yeah, I agree. It'd be a great use case. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Ezekiel. Thanks, James. Our next question is from Ganesh.
Hi everyone, I'm a researcher in stablecoins at Warwick Business School. So just a couple of questions. To Ezechiel, I wanted to ask like another use case could be negative rates and whether it's similar to the cashback system that you proposed, but obviously some slight differences. Like have you considered that in your framework? And my other question to Arpit and Siddharth is, so I understand the concept of the index. So from a pricing point of view, is the index price going to be some sort of weighted average of the different stable coins in the basket? Or I guess one kind of question I have is, suppose that once you start this, then only one of the stablecoin collaterals dominate and not the others, then does that mean that instead of being an index as a weighted average, it ends up just being like a synthetic DAI or a synthetic Tether? And so ideally, like, how do you make sure that you have sufficient of each collateral type so that it effectively becomes an index?
Cool. Well, thanks, Ganesh. I guess since you had the first question for me, I'll jump in, then I'll send it over to the Sid and Arpit. So yeah, so negative rates. I mean, essentially, when you think about the demurrage fees, there's really no difference conceptually between a demurrage fee that you're putting onto money versus a negative interest rate. It's just really honestly a matter of, you know, how often are you doing it? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it daily? You know, there's really no difference. I think it's more of a conceptual difference. So there's been a lot of discussion in the monetary policy space as to whether or not an interest rate should be put onto CBDC, right? So whether that's a positive rate or whether that's a negative rate. And I think one of the concerns, you know, that people have with negative rates is, you know, obviously then people would just go to cash again, because then cash you can't really impose a negative rate on actual physical dollars. You know, but I mean, again, there's no difference. I think it's just a matter of whether or not, you know, what people will think about it. Like, I think if you're telling people here's stimulus money and we want you to use this money, you know, because we're trying, you know, there's a time of crisis and we're trying to stimulate the economy. You know, it's one thing to say, you know, and by the way, you know, we're going to claw this money back if you don't spend it. Like, that's probably an easier argument to make than for a central bank to say, hey, by the way, you know, that like money that you've been saving in your savings account for years because you're using it to buy up a house or whatever it is. If you don't start spending that, we're going to charge you a negative interest rate. We're going to start taking some of that money away. Like, that would be a harder policy, I think, to enact. And I think politicians would probably steer clear of that. Again, you can conceptually, you can do that with the technology. I think it's just a matter of like the difference, right? So if you're giving people the stimulus, they understand that like, okay, I better spend this or it's going to be gone. Like, that's fine. Like gift cards, right? I think gift cards right now, if someone gives you a gift card for a local store, like they oftentimes will expire after like 90 days or whatever it is. So people know they got to spend it quickly. So I think that's the difference. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Arpit and Sid.
Right, Ganesh. So what we do is, like, DeFi is all about composability, right? So as you said, like, how do we ensure that really the underlying pool actually stays to be an index, right? So there's a protocol called Curve Finance, and they are a automated market maker for stablecoins, which means that if you want to trade stablecoins, Curve Finance is a really optimized dApp for that, right? So basically, from a bird's eye view, how that works is, let's say you have two stablecoins, okay, and both of them you can trade them 1:1. But let's say one stablecoin is rising, so that opens up an arbitrage opportunity. So you can put in this coin and remove this coin, right? Because this is more expensive. So at that point, what happens is the pool becomes equal again in value. And because this particular coin is lesser in value, but there are more in number, right? And this particular coin that had risen in value, but now because you traded them, so this one is less in number in the pool, right? But when you multiply with them with their prices, the pool values are equal. So this is how an automated market maker works. And the beauty of this algorithm is it doesn't really scale 1:1 or something. So let's say if one stable coin was to become 2x of the other, right? Then the amount of stable coin that you would need to trade in would be much higher than that you would get, right? And this varies exponentially. So if you were giving 10 coins when they were at peg for 10:10, right? You'd probably need to give 20 coins for 15 when this is higher, right? You won't get 20 on 20. If this goes even further higher, you provide 30, but you just get like 10 coins. So this varies exponentially, right? So what that means is unless one stablecoin moons, like goes 10x of with respect to other stablecoins, right? The math behind this will ensure that there is always some amount of each stablecoin in the basket, right? So this is how their formula is defined, right? So I think you might already be familiar with Uniswap, probably. So Curve Finance is a Uniswap for stablecoins, and because they do that really well, maintaining all the coins in their basket, right? We build on the shoulders of the giants. So because they solve that problem, what we do is you give stablecoins to our protocol, we put them in Curve. Now we trust Curve that, okay, because the way that the math is defined, there will be always some amount of each coin in their kitty, right? And that is how we ensure.
Okay, so I think I get it, but just to clarify, so the weights are kind of determined by this curve protocol, and do you know those weights beforehand, or they kind of just based on the algorithm and they can change over time?
They're kind of like 25% each in a pool of 4 coins. But if a coin is, but if a coin is really moving from its peg, then it can vary, right? So I'm not sure about the percentages or the weights in that scenario, but as long as the coins are, within like 0 to 3% of the peg, they are almost equal. So 25% of each.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ganesh. And our next question, I think our last question, is from Lori Cabal. Lori?
Hi, how are you? My question is for Ezechiel. Can you discuss if there are examples of successful programs that increase the velocity of money? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, there really aren't any right now as far as that have specifically focused on increasing the velocity of money. It's a relatively new concept. In fact, when I was doing my research, I didn't find anything that was being discussed on it. I think the closest thing we have that central banks have is this idea of negative interest rates. So the prior question, what they've been doing for that has been more about trying to lower rates so much that people are forced from sort of an asset liability perspective, right? So a portfolio perspective that, okay, well, I'm not going to get any return by leaving the cash that I have in my savings account or my checking account because rates are 0. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to invest that in stocks or bonds or whatever because I'm looking for a higher return. I guess on some level that could help, I guess, to increase the velocity, but there really hasn't been much discussion on it. A recent paper from an economist at the St. Louis Federal Reserve, a guy named David Andolfato, wrote a paper similar to our idea. He calls it hot credit money. It's exactly the same thing where, if you get stimulus money, whether it's in the form of a stimulus check or it's like an EBT or something like that, that you basically have X amount of time before you lose it if you don't use it. So there are on the periphery, but it hasn't really been talked about yet. So we're hoping to kind of socialize it a bit more.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Lori. And we actually have time for one more question, I guess. I will, and it's from Jack, who doesn't have a camera or mic, he said. And the question is for DeFi Dollar. How will you programmatically decide which stablecoins to include in the allocation? And how does it work when your staked coins lose value to the point where it becomes a problem?
Got
Yeah,
it.
sure. So,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Okay,
So,
okay.
currently, right, I think it's not being decided programmatically, right? I think as Arpit mentioned, we're building on top of Curve, and they've got different pools, right? There's the Y pool, there's the SUSD pool, right? To start off with, what we've done is we're building using the SUSD pool. So there are 4 coins that come along with it, right? Which are DAI, USDT, USDC, and SUSD, right? So that is where we start off from. And once we observe the behavior, right? Once we see some data points coming out of that, we will go ahead and actually expand it to some of the other Curve pools, right? So in our system, right, these pools, liquidity pools are denominated as peaks. So it's not a certainty, right, that it will always be Curve related peaks. We can also expand it to other liquidity pools, right? As and when the system matures, right? But it's just sort of a design approach that we've taken, that we're going to start small and then keep on expanding it as we go ahead, right? Arpit, yeah, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think eventually this decision will lie with the community, right? So once there's enough traction, once we know that there are enough people who really want to use our product, then we really need to plug in governance with that, and then it's on to the community to decide what stablecoins they want, what weights they want. I mean, I would love to see the Celo dollar as one of the coins in the DeFi dollar, right? Because composability. But is Ezechiel, is Celo dollar on Ethereum or is it on the Celo blockchain? Sorry.
It's on Celo blockchain. It's sort of a version of Ethereum, but it's our own proprietary blockchain. So we are ERC20 compatible. So there is some compatibility there and some interoperability, but we are an entirely new blockchain.
But it can be wrapped.
Yep. Because you could wrap it, sure, yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes, and so yeah, I told you guys I'd get you off by 2, and I'll do that. So last question, real quick. I'm going to take it. You can answer real quick. If we're on this call again a year from today, and Ezechiel, I'll start with you. What do you think we're going to be talking about a year from today that nobody's talking about today in terms of stablecoins?
I mean, not that no one's talking about it. I think that there's going to be a much bigger conversation about interoperability. I think right now, and I especially see it in the CBD space, everyone's so focused on kind of their own thing. And so maybe standing up these blockchains and these different private chains. And I think we're going to have to start to really think about, well, how do we build bridges between the different chains then? And I think that that's going to be, I know it will be an issue in the central banking space. And I imagine in the broader stablecoin space perhaps too, but definitely this idea of interoperability.
Makes a lot of sense. I guess we're probably not going to use Swift for that.
No, we'll probably not use Swift.
Okay. Thanks, Ezechiel. And Arpit, Sid, you want to take a whack at the last question?
Yeah. So I think in that regard, right, as we already discussed, with the scope and with the speed of innovation that's coming along, right, I think there are going to be much better approaches than probably what we've seen till now, right, in terms of having, let's say, algorithmic backed stablecoins. I think algorithmic backed stablecoins is something that I kind of foresee to become like pretty huge in the coming days, right? I think we had Reserve, but they folded, but there is definitely scope for other players to come in and fill that gap, right? And I think liquidity fragmentation across all of these different pairs, right? Or let's say even centralized or even decentralized exchanges, right? I think that's going to become sort of a problem, and that opens up the space. I'm not shilling DeFi dollar here, but I think for all meta stable coins, I think it's going to be, you definitely need, so I think whenever any industry becomes big enough, right, there are, let's say, players who come in kind of, I won't say a marketplace, but basically aggregators, right, in that sense. So there will be some sort of DeFi aggregators like us who kind of provide like better services, taking all of these underlying coins, right? And that is something that, although people are definitely talking about it, we are building it. But yeah, I think there are different flavors to it and different other approaches that probably we've not yet thought about.
Okay, well, terrific. Well, Ezechiel, Sid, Arpit, thanks a lot for the time. Thanks everybody who dialed in, and we'll see you all next week.
Yeah. Thank you, Lou.
Thanks a lot for having us, Lou. Yeah.